Biker gang bullies black student, not knowing his father is a Navy SEAL. Marcus adjusted the strap of his backpack as he walked down the cracked sidewalk, the early morning sun glinting off his navy blue suit. He was proud of that suit. It was not just clothing, it was a statement. While most kids at his school chose hoodies, jeans, or sneakers, Marcus had made the choice to carry himself differently. He believed in discipline, in looking sharp, in walking tall even when the world around him tried to bend him down. His father had drilled that lesson into him since childhood. How you present yourself is how the world will first measure you. Always carry yourself with respect, son, and never let anyone take that from you. The small town where Marcus lived was not the kind of place that welcomed change or difference. It had old roads, old diners, and old attitudes. On most mornings, the air smelled of gasoline and fried bacon drifting from the corner cafe, where the same men sat on the same stools they had for years. On this morning, though, the quiet was broken by the low rumble of motorcycle engines. The biker gang had gathered early. They leaned against their polished chrome machines, leather vests patched with skulls, flames, and slogans that were supposed to inspire fear. They were loud, rough, and carried themselves like kings of the street. People usually crossed to the other side of the road when they saw them. But Marcus, with his chin up and shoulders back, kept walking straight ahead. He had promised himself long ago that he would never let fear dictate his path. The leader of the bikers, a bald man with tattoos crawling up both arms, noticed Marcus before anyone else. He stepped forward, blocking the sidewalk. His face carried a smirk that was half amusement, half menace. Well, look at this, he barked, loud enough for all the others to hear. A little suit and tie kid walking through our road. Marcus stopped but did not step back. He simply stood, his dark eyes focused straight ahead. The rest of the bikers turned their heads, their chuckles filling the morning air. "This ain't your place, boy," the leader sneered, his voice low and heavy. "You don't belong here. Don't you know that?" The words carried poison, meant to cut deep. Marcus heard the insult behind the insult. He heard the rejection, the attempt to make him feel small. But instead of shrinking, Marcus stood taller. His silence was not weakness, it was defiance. His father had taught him that silence could sometimes be the loudest answer. The gang leader did not like that silence. He took a step closer, his boots hitting the pavement like drum beats. He curled his fist, lifting it slowly as if daring Marcus to flinch. "What's the matter? Cat got your tongue? Or maybe you're too scared to talk." Behind him, the other bikers laughed louder. One of them shouted, "Look at him. He thinks he's better than us with that tie on." Another added, "Maybe we should teach him where he really belongs." Their voices grew, overlapping, each trying to outdo the other in cruelty. But Marcus still said nothing. He remembered his father's voice again, echoing like it always did when he faced moments like this. "Strength, son, is not in the first punch you throw. It's in the last word you refuse to let them steal from you." So he did not speak. He did not fight. He simply looked at the leader, his expression calm, almost unreadable. The silence unsettled the bikers. They had expected fear. They had expected Marcus to beg, to apologize, maybe even to run. But instead, the boy in the blue suit stood like a stone pillar in front of them. The leader's smirk faltered. For a moment, there was something else in his eyes. Confusion, maybe even doubt. But he quickly covered it with a louder growl. He shoved Marcus's shoulder, hard enough to make him stumble back half a step. The crowd that had begun to gather across the street gasped. They knew what usually happened next when the gang chose a target. Marcus adjusted his backpack again, regaining his balance. He did not raise his fists. He did not lash out. Instead, he straightened his jacket, brushed the dust off his sleeve, and lifted his chin higher than before. His calmness was a challenge all its own, though he never said a word. The leader leaned in, his lips curling into a snarl. "You think you're tough? You think you can just walk through here like you own the place?" Still, Marcus stayed silent. Behind them, a woman whispered to another, "That boy's gonna get hurt." Someone else muttered, "Why doesn't he just leave?" But Marcus had already decided long ago. He would never run from hate. Running gave hate the victory. Standing gave him the strength. The leader's face reddened with anger. He was used to winning by fear, not by fists. But this boy was stealing his power without even trying. He lifted his hand again, this time closing it into a full fist. The gang around him grew quiet, waiting for the punch. Marcus's eyes did not waver. Deep inside, his heart pounded against his ribs, but he forced his breathing steady. He remembered training with his father in the backyard. Push-ups, sprints, the lessons about courage. He remembered the times his father had knelt beside him and said, "Fear will knock on your door, Marcus. But you don't have to let it inside." And so when the biker's fist hung in the air, Marcus did not blink. He looked straight into the man's eyes, unafraid. The moment stretched. The world seemed to pause. For the first time, it was the biker leader who hesitated. His fist hovered, but it never landed. Something in Marcus's stillness unsettled him. Something he could not put words to. Finally, with a frustrated growl, the man lowered his hand. "You're not worth it," he spat. He shoved past Marcus, signaling the others to let him go. The laughter that had once been so loud was now uneasy. Thinner, as if the gang themselves could not explain why their leader had stopped. Marcus did not look back. He adjusted his tie once more, stepped forward, and continued walking. His pace was steady, his back unbent. Behind him, whispers rose from the small crowd, some mocking, some amazed, some simply stunned. At that moment, Marcus felt both the weight of loneliness and the strength of resolve. He knew this would not be the last time he faced them. He knew standing tall would come at a price. But deep inside, he also knew something else. He was not standing alone. He carried with him every lesson his father had ever taught, every ounce of strength that had been passed down to him. And though the bikers did not know it yet, they had just tested the son of a man who had faced darker nights and harsher battles than they could ever imagine. Marcus walked on, the engines rumbling behind him, but his spirit unshaken. The real fight had only just begun. Marcus walked into the school gates that morning with his mind still heavy from what had happened on the sidewalk. Students had seen it, whispers already spread, and by the time he reached his locker, he could feel eyes following him. Some of his classmates gave him looks of pity, others smirked, a few nodded in quiet respect, but no one said a word to his face. In the silence, Marcus realized that every step he took now was being measured, not just by the biker gang outside, but by everyone watching inside. He pulled his books out and stood tall, even though deep inside he felt the sting of being surrounded and mocked. His father's voice came to him again. "The world will test you when you least expect it. It is not the test that defines you, but your answer to it." That reminder helped him steady his breathing and push forward into the day. In his first class, a group of boys in the back whispered loudly enough for him to hear. He just stood there, one said. Didn't even swing back. Another added with a laugh, "If that had been me, I'd have knocked that biker out cold." Their laughter echoed across the classroom, but Marcus kept his eyes on his notebook. He wanted to believe their words were empty, but each one cut a little deeper. He was human after all, and the sting of humiliation is something no one is immune to. Yet he reminded himself that reacting in anger was exactly what the bikers had wanted. To give in would have been to lose. So he sat straight, wrote his notes, and stayed silent, though the whispers never stopped. At lunch, his friend Jordan found him sitting alone under the big oak tree at the edge of the campus. Jordan was one of the few people Marcus trusted completely, someone who never judged and always spoke honestly. He dropped his backpack beside Marcus and sat down with a sigh. "You know everyone's talking about this morning, right?" he said. Marcus looked at him calmly, saying nothing at first, but Jordan pressed on. "Some people think you looked weak, but I don't. I think you looked different, like you weren't scared. Most of them would have run, but you didn't." Jordan paused, his voice lowering. "What they don't know is who your father is." Marcus's jaw tightened slightly and his eyes drifted toward the horizon. His father had always told him to keep his background private, to never use his name or his military past as a shield. Marcus respected that. "They don't need to know," Marcus said softly. "If they knew, it wouldn't mean I was strong. It would only mean they're afraid of him." Jordan nodded, understanding, though part of him wished Marcus would reveal the truth. Maybe then the whispers would stop. But Marcus had chosen his path, and Jordan respected that. Later that day, Marcus's history teacher, Mrs. Green, asked him to stay after class. She was an older woman, sharp-eyed but kind, someone who had taught in that town long enough to know the weight of its old prejudices. When the last student left, she turned to Marcus. "I heard what happened," she said gently. "I saw how you walked into class this morning, head held high. That takes strength, more strength than most grown men ever learn." Marcus shifted uneasily in his seat, unsure how to respond. Mrs. Green leaned forward slightly. "The world will always have people who try to belittle you. They will shout. They will laugh, they will try to make you doubt yourself. But if you keep walking as you did today, you'll realize you've already beaten them. Marcus thanked her quietly, and though her words gave him comfort, he still felt the weight of the stairs that followed him through the halls. When school ended, Marcus began his walk home. His path once again brought him near the street where the bikers liked to gather. He considered taking a longer route, but stopped himself. Running away was never an option. As he turned the corner, he saw them again. The same motorcycles, the same black vests, the same faces waiting for him. His heart beat faster, but he walked steadily forward. This time the crowd was larger. More students had followed, curious to see if something would happen again. The gang leader stepped forward, blocking his path just as before. Only this time he wore an even darker look. "Didn't I tell you this ain't your place?" He growled, his voice louder so that everyone could hear. Marcus did not respond, but he did not step back either. The leader stepped closer, sneering. "You think you can just ignore us? You think you're too good to speak?" The bikers behind him roared with laughter. One of them shouted, "Make him kneel." Another added, "Show him what happens when he doesn't listen." Marcus's chest rose and fell, but he remembered his father's words. He had promised himself he would not let them break him. The leader shoved him again, harder this time, and Marcus stumbled but regained his balance. The students watching gasped, some covering their mouths, waiting for the fight to explode. The leader raised his fist high, ready to strike, but still Marcus did not flinch. His silence, his calmness, it enraged them more than any words could have. The leader snarled, "You're going to regret this, boy. You'll learn your place." The moment felt like it would snap into violence, but before anything could happen, the sound of a car engine rolled into the street. Heads turned as a black pickup truck pulled to the side. The door opened and a tall man stepped out. He wore plain jeans and a gray t-shirt, but there was something about the way he moved, controlled, deliberate, steady, that made the noise around him falter. It was Marcus's father. The bikers had no idea who he was, no idea what he had seen, what he had survived. To them, he was just another man. But to Marcus, his father's presence was enough to steady every trembling thought inside him. The man closed the truck door calmly and began walking toward them, his boots crunching against the gravel. His face was stern, his eyes sharp, his posture carrying the quiet weight of authority. The leader of the bikers frowned, clearly annoyed by the interruption, but he did not step back. Marcus's father stopped just a few feet away, his voice calm but powerful. "You boys messed up," he said evenly. The words hung heavy in the air. Some of the students watching looked at each other in confusion. The bikers laughed nervously, trying to cover their unease. "And who are you supposed to be?" The leader scoffed. "Another suit here to tell us what to do?" But there was something in the man's eyes that made even the toughest of them hesitate. Marcus felt a rush of relief and pride. He did not want his father to fight for him, but he knew this moment mattered. His father had once told him, "Sometimes you stand alone. Other times you stand with those who gave you the strength to fight in the first place." And today they were standing together. The leader looked between Marcus and his father, unsure of what to do next. His fists still clenched, but his confidence beginning to crack. Marcus stood silently, his father beside him, both of them unshaken. The tension grew, the crowd hushed, and in that silence, something powerful was about to unfold. Something that would change the way the entire town saw Marcus, his father, and the gang that had tried to break them. The air was thick with tension as Marcus stood side by side with his father. The gang leader still had his fist half raised, but the sudden arrival of this tall, calm man had frozen him in place. There was something about Marcus's father that unsettled everyone. He did not shout. He did not wave his arms or puff out his chest like the bikers did. He simply stood there, steady as stone, his eyes cutting through the noise like a blade. It was the kind of presence that made even the most reckless men pause. Marcus felt the difference immediately. He had been carrying the weight of the gang's cruelty alone all day, but now it was different. His father was not here to fight his battles for him. He was here to remind the world that Marcus was not standing alone. The students gathered around the edges of the street had gone quiet. They leaned forward, their phones forgotten for once, as if they instinctively knew this moment mattered more than a quick video. The gang leader finally lowered his fist but refused to back away. "This your kid?" he asked, his voice trying to sound tough but edged with unease. Marcus's father did not flinch. "He's my son," he said evenly, his tone calm but firm. And you've already crossed a line. The leader scoffed and tried to laugh it off, glancing back at his crew for support. They chuckled along, but it was forced, thinner than before. "What are you going to do about it, old man?" he asked. "You think you can scare us by showing up? This is our street." Marcus's father tilted his head slightly, studying the man in front of him like a soldier studies the ground before a mission. He didn't answer right away. He let the silence stretch until the laughter of the bikers died down on its own. Then he spoke, his words calm and steady. "You don't even know what fear is. You think raising your voice and throwing insults makes you strong? I've seen men twice your size cry like children when real fear showed up. Strength isn't in how loud you shout. It's in how much you can endure without losing yourself." The leader's jaw tightened. He wanted to answer, but the words caught in his throat. The other bikers shifted uncomfortably, sensing something they could not quite put their fingers on. Marcus watched the exchange with quiet awe. He had always known his father was different, but seeing him stand there unshaken and unmoved was like watching a storm face down a mountain. For years his father had spoken about discipline, patience, and self-control, but now Marcus was seeing those lessons in action. It was not just advice, it was a way of life. And the gang, for all their noise and bluster, could not match it. The leader finally took a step closer, though his eyes betrayed a flicker of hesitation. "You don't scare me," he said, though his voice lacked the confidence it once had. Marcus's father leaned in slightly, his voice dropping lower, quieter, yet somehow more powerful. "I'm not here to scare you. I'm here to tell you that you will not touch my son again. Not today. Not tomorrow. Not ever." The words were not shouted. They were not decorated with threats. But their weight was undeniable. Even the students watching felt it. It was a line drawn so clearly that no one could mistake it. The leader clenched his fists, his pride refusing to let him back down completely. "And if I do?" he asked, his voice shaking just enough to betray him. Marcus's father stared at him for a long moment, then answered with a calmness that sent chills through everyone listening. "Then you'll learn the hard way what happens when you push a man who has spent his life protecting people from real danger. You'll learn that your loud voices and motorcycles mean nothing when you're faced with someone who has walked through fire and come out standing." For the first time, the gang leader took a step back. He didn't want to, but something in his gut told him this was not a man to test. The other bikers looked at each other, their laughter gone, their bravado fading. The balance of power in that moment had shifted completely, and everyone watching could feel it. Marcus felt a rush of emotions, relief, pride, and a deep understanding of the lessons his father had tried to teach him his whole life. His father was showing him that true strength didn't come from fists or anger, but from conviction and the refusal to bend to hate. Marcus realized that his silence earlier that morning had been the right choice. He hadn't been weak. He had been stronger than the bikers ever expected him to be. His father's presence now only confirmed it. The leader spat on the ground trying to save face and barked at his crew to follow him. They muttered among themselves but obeyed, walking back to their motorcycles. The engines roared to life one by one, but the noise no longer carried the same power it had earlier. It sounded hollow, desperate, like thunder trying to cover up the fact that the storm had already passed. The students who had been watching began to whisper to each other again, but their tones had changed. They weren't mocking anymore. They were curious, impressed, even inspired. Some looked at Marcus differently, no longer seeing just a quiet boy in a suit, but someone who had faced down fear and stood tall. As the bikers rode off, Marcus turned to his father. He expected anger, maybe even disappointment, but what he saw was calm pride. His father placed a hand on his shoulder and spoke softly so only Marcus could hear. "You did well today, son. You didn't let them take your strength. You didn't let them control you. That's what matters." Marcus swallowed hard, his throat tight with unspoken emotion. "I wanted to fight back," he admitted quietly. "I wanted to show them I wasn't afraid." His father nodded. "That feeling is natural. But fighting with fists would have only proved them right. Standing your ground with dignity proved them wrong, and that's worth more than any punch you could have thrown." Marcus felt the truth of those words settle in his heart. He thought back to the way the leader's face had faltered when he refused to flinch, how his silence had unnerved them more than anything else. He realized now that his father had been preparing him for moments like this his whole life. Every morning run, every late-night talk, every lesson about patience and strength, it had all been leading to this. And though the battle was far from over, Marcus knew he was ready for whatever came next. That night, as they sat together at the dinner table, Marcus finally asked his father about his past. He had always known his father was different, but the way he had stood against the bikers today made him want to understand more. His father was quiet for a long time before he spoke. "I served as a Navy SEAL for years," he said finally, his voice steady but tinged with memory. "I've seen men break under pressure. I've seen others rise when everything around them was falling apart. What I learned is that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's standing tall even when fear is screaming in your ear. And today, son, you showed courage." Marcus listened intently, his heart swelling with pride. His father rarely spoke about his service, but when he did, every word carried weight. "I didn't tell you this before," his father continued, "because I didn't want you to lean on my past. I wanted you to build your own strength. And you did. You showed me today that you're ready to carry yourself in a world that will try to break you." Marcus looked down at his plate, his throat tight with emotion. "I'm proud to be your son," he whispered. His father reached across the table and squeezed his hand firmly. "And I'm proud to be your father," he replied. "Remember this, Marcus, you don't need to prove yourself to anyone. Your actions will speak louder than anything they say." Marcus nodded, the lesson settling deep inside him. He knew the bikers would not forget what had happened, and he knew they might try again. But he also knew something else now. He was not alone. He had his father's strength within him, and he had proven to himself that he could endure. Whatever came next, he was ready. And the bikers, for all their noise, had no idea just how much stronger Marcus truly was. The next morning arrived heavy with an uneasy silence. Marcus woke up early, as always, slipping into his pressed shirt and jacket before heading out the door. His father was already in the kitchen drinking coffee, his eyes sharp even in the quiet hours. He looked up as Marcus passed by. "Keep your head up today," he said, his voice calm but serious. "Yesterday wasn't the end of it. Boys like that don't just walk away. They'll come back. And when they do, remember what you learned." Marcus nodded, understanding more than he could say. He felt a mixture of pride and dread inside him. Pride for having stood his ground, dread for what might come next, but he was determined not to let fear dictate his choices. He adjusted his tie in the mirror before stepping outside, determined to walk the same path as yesterday. As he approached the street corner where the bikers usually gathered, the sound of engines filled the morning air. This time they were waiting for him. The entire gang was there, larger in number, their motorcycles lined up like a wall of metal and chrome. Their laughter rang out even before he reached them. "Here comes the suit again," one of them jeered. "Thought you could embarrass us yesterday, huh?" Marcus kept walking steady, his eyes forward, his steps firm. He knew turning around would only fuel their fire. He had no choice but to meet them head-on. The leader stepped forward, his eyes darker than before. Yesterday's encounter had bruised his pride, and today he was determined to reclaim it. "You think you're better than us because you got Daddy to step in?" He spat, his words sharp and loud. The other bikers chuckled, echoing him like a chorus. "Without him, you're nothing," one shouted. "You're just a scared little boy in a suit." The crowd of students, larger than the day before, gathered quickly. Word had spread about what happened, and no one wanted to miss what they thought would be the showdown. Phones were out this time, cameras ready, but Marcus ignored them. His father's words echoed in his head. "They'll come back. Stand tall anyway." The leader stepped closer, so close Marcus could smell the smoke and leather on his jacket. He shoved Marcus hard in the chest, making him stumble back against the fence. The crowd gasped. "Where's your old man now?" The leader sneered. "Not here to protect you today, is he?" Marcus steadied himself, straightened his jacket, and looked him in the eye without saying a word. That silence again. It was the same silence that had rattled them yesterday, and it was already working again. But the leader was angrier this time. He raised his voice louder, trying to cover his unease. "Kneel," he demanded. "Right here, right now, kneel in front of everyone, or I'll make you regret it." The crowd froze, the weight of those words sinking in. Everyone leaned closer, waiting to see what Marcus would do. Inside, Marcus felt his heart racing, but his father's lessons grounded him. He remembered the long runs in the early mornings, his father's voice beside him saying, "Pain doesn't break you. It builds you. Stand tall, son, always." He refused to give the gang what they wanted. He would not kneel. Slowly, Marcus straightened his back and lifted his chin higher. His silence was his answer. The leader's face twisted in rage, the veins in his neck bulging as his pride took another blow. "You think you're brave?" he roared. "You think standing there makes you strong?" He drew back his fist again, the crowd erupting in shouts. The moment was seconds away from violence. Then, like yesterday, a voice cut through the noise. But this time it wasn't his father's, it was Marcus himself. Calm, steady, and louder than anyone expected. "You don't scare me," he said. The words were simple, but they carried weight. The crowd fell silent instantly. The bikers stared at him, shocked that he had spoken. The leader's fist hung in the air, trembling with rage, but Marcus did not look away. He repeated it slower this time. "You don't scare me." The leader's face darkened, his pride stung deeper than before. He lunged forward, grabbing Marcus by the collar, yanking him close until they were face to face. "You're gonna regret that," he hissed. But Marcus did not flinch. His eyes were steady, his voice calm as he said, "You already lost." For a moment, the entire street felt frozen. Even the roar of the motorcycles seemed to fade into silence. The leader shoved Marcus back roughly, letting go of his collar. He turned to his gang, his pride unraveling in front of everyone. He needed to do something to reclaim control. But the boy's calmness had cut deeper than any punch. The crowd of students whispered furiously, their voices rising. Some were stunned by Marcus's courage, others inspired. A few even started to cheer quietly, though they quickly hushed themselves. The leader could feel the shift. He was losing them, losing the power he thought he held. That realization only made him more dangerous. "This isn't over," he growled, pointing a finger at Marcus. "You'll pay for this." He turned sharply and stormed back to his motorcycle, the gang following behind him like shadows. The engines roared again, but once more the sound rang hollow. They sped off, leaving behind a silence that seemed almost heavier than the noise. Marcus stood in the middle of the street, his collar wrinkled, his heart pounding. But he did not show it. He adjusted his jacket calmly, picked up his backpack from the ground, and walked forward. The students parted, their eyes wide, some filled with respect, others with awe. No one mocked him this time. No one whispered that he was weak. They had seen something different today, something that shook them. Marcus hadn't just endured. He had spoken, and his words had been stronger than the gang's fists. As he walked through the crowd, Jordan rushed to his side, his face lit with excitement and worry. "Marcus, that was insane. I thought he was going to hit you, but you didn't back down. You told him he didn't scare you. Do you know how huge that was?" Marcus gave a small nod, his voice quiet. "I just said the truth." That afternoon, when Marcus got home, his father was waiting in the yard. He had already heard what happened. Word traveled fast in a small town. Marcus expected a lecture, maybe even anger, but his father's face was calm, his eyes steady as always. "You spoke today," he said simply. Marcus nodded. "I told him he didn't scare me." His father's lips curved into the faintest smile. "And did he?" Marcus thought about it, then shook his head. "Not anymore." His father clapped a hand on his shoulder, firm and reassuring. "That's the strength I wanted you to find. Yesterday you showed discipline. Today you found your voice. Both are weapons, son, and you'll need them in this life." They sat together on the porch as the sun began to set, the air cooling around them. Marcus asked quietly, "Will they come back again?" His father looked out toward the horizon, his eyes narrowing. "Yes," he said finally. "Men like that don't like losing. They'll try again, harder this time. But you've already beaten them in ways they can't understand. Every time you refuse to bend, you take their power away. They can't touch that no matter how hard they try." Marcus let those words settle inside him, the fear in his chest slowly replaced with a growing strength. He realized now that his battles weren't just against the bikers. They were against doubt, fear, and the pressure to give in. And as long as he stood tall, he could win every time. That night, as he lay in bed staring at the ceiling, Marcus replayed the moment in his mind. The crowd, the fists, the words. "You don't scare me." He whispered them again to himself, stronger this time. He knew tomorrow would bring new challenges. He knew the gang would not stop. But he also knew something else. They could not break what his father had built inside him. They could not take away his dignity, his courage, or his voice, and with those he would face whatever came next. The following day, the tension in the town was almost tangible. Everyone seemed to be waiting for something to happen. Students at the school whispered in hallways, replaying the words Marcus had said to the biker leader. "You don't scare me," had become a phrase that traveled from ear to ear. Some repeated it in admiration, others in disbelief. For Marcus, it was not about being remembered, it was about being true to himself. but he could not deny that something had changed. For the first time, the same classmates who once mocked him now looked at him with respect. They nodded at him in passing. Some even whispered encouragement. Jordan slapped him on the back at lunch and said, "You don't realize it yet, man, but you're changing the way people see you. That gang used to be untouchable, and you're making them look powerless." Marcus smiled faintly, though he knew Jordan was right, and he also knew that the gang would not forgive him for it. That evening, as Marcus walked home, he noticed the street quieter than usual. The rumble of motorcycles was absent, replaced by the sound of cicadas buzzing in the trees. He should have felt relief, but instead he felt the calm before a storm. His instincts told him they were planning something. His father noticed it too when Marcus got home. They sat on the porch, the warm air heavy with silence, until his father finally spoke. "They won't stop, not yet. You bruised their pride. Men like that cling to pride as if it's the only thing keeping them alive. They'll come harder. Maybe not tonight, maybe not tomorrow, but soon." Marcus nodded, his chest tightening. "So what do I do when they come?" His father leaned forward, his elbows on his knees, his eyes fixed on his son. "You do what you've already been doing. You stand tall. You don't bend. You don't let them dictate who you are. But when the time comes, you'll see something else too. Sometimes words aren't enough. Sometimes a man has to stand in front of another and let him know the line cannot be crossed. That day is coming, and when it does, you won't face it alone." 2 nights later, Marcus learned what his father meant. It was just after sunset when the sound of motorcycles filled the neighborhood. This time, it was not just at the street corner. They came down his block, their engines roaring like thunder, their headlights glaring against the houses. Curtains parted, neighbors peered out, worried but unwilling to step outside. The gang stopped right in front of Marcus's house, their tires screeching against the pavement. Marcus stood at the window, his fists tightening. He knew this was different. This was not just about mocking him in front of classmates. This was a message. They wanted him to know they could reach him anywhere. His father stood beside him, calm as always, his face unreadable. "Stay inside," he said firmly. But Marcus shook his head. "No, if I stay inside, they win." His father looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "All right, but you don't go out there alone." Together they stepped onto the porch. The engines cut, leaving only the sound of insects and the faint hiss of cooling pipes. The leader swung off his bike, his boots striking the ground with force. He looked up at Marcus and his father standing side by side and smirked, though his eyes betrayed unease. "Well, well," he sneered. "The hero and his daddy. Thought you could humiliate us? Thought you could make us look weak? That ends tonight." His words echoed through the quiet street, the other bikers nodding behind him. Though their postures were stiffer than usual, they remembered the way Marcus's father had spoken last time. They had not forgotten the weight of his calmness. Marcus's father stepped forward slightly, his voice steady. "You've already lost," he said. "Every time you show up here, you prove how small you are. You need your gang, your bikes, your noise to feel powerful. But deep down, you know the truth. A boy in a suit already made you look weak without throwing a single punch." The crowd of bikers shifted uncomfortably. The leader's face burned with anger. "You think you're tough because you talk fancy?" He snapped. "You don't know who you're dealing with." Marcus's father's eyes hardened. "And you don't know who you're standing in front of." His words cut like a blade, sharp and heavy. Marcus felt pride swell inside him, watching his father stand like an unshakable wall. He understood now what real strength looked like. It wasn't loud, it wasn't flashy. It was steady, disciplined, immovable. The leader stepped closer, his fists clenched, his voice rising. "I'm not scared of you." Marcus's father didn't move. "Yes, you are," he said softly. "That's why you're here. That's why you brought all of them. Because alone, you know you'd already be on the ground." The bikers muttered among themselves, some shifting their weight, clearly uncertain. Marcus's father's presence was breaking their confidence. Marcus, standing just behind him, felt courage rising in his own chest. He stepped forward, his voice calm but strong. "You came to scare me," he said to the leader. "But you can't, not anymore. You lost the first time I didn't run. You lost the second time I spoke. And tonight you'll lose again, because I'm not afraid of you." The students who had followed from a distance gasped. A few neighbors had stepped outside now, watching silently. The leader looked around and realized the crowd wasn't cheering for him. They were staring at Marcus and his father with respect, admiration, maybe even hope. The leader roared in frustration, swinging his fist toward Marcus's father. But before it could land, his father moved. He didn't strike him back, didn't throw him to the ground. He simply blocked, stepping into him with such controlled force that the leader stumbled backward. His pride cracked in front of everyone. The bikers froze. They had seen fights before, but they had never seen a man so calm, so precise, so unshaken. The leader scrambled to regain his balance, but his face betrayed him. He was rattled. Marcus's father didn't chase him. He didn't need to. He simply stood tall and said, "You come here again, and you'll see what real consequences look like. You're not just picking on a boy anymore. You're picking on a man who has spent his life defending against people stronger, faster, and far more dangerous than you'll ever be. Walk away now, before you dig a hole you can't climb out of." His words cut through the night like thunder. The silence afterward was deafening. One by one, the bikers looked at each other, their confidence fading. Finally, the leader spat on the ground, muttering curses under his breath, but he didn't step forward again. He turned, climbed back on his motorcycle, and started the engine. The others followed, their pride wounded, their power broken. The roar of their departure filled the street, but everyone knew it carried no victory. They had been beaten, not by fists, but by dignity, courage, and the unshakable strength of a father and his son. Marcus stood there, his chest rising and falling, adrenaline still rushing through him. He turned to his father, who looked at him with quiet pride. "You didn't flinch," his father said. "You stood with me and you found your voice again. That's how battles are won." Marcus swallowed hard, emotions choking his words. "I couldn't have done it without you." His father shook his head. "No, son. You already had it in you. I just reminded you of what you carried all along." Marcus felt tears sting his eyes, but he held them back, knowing his father would understand without needing to see them fall. As neighbors stepped back into their homes and students whispered about what they had just witnessed, Marcus realized something important. The fight with the bikers wasn't just about him anymore. It had become a symbol. A boy who refused to kneel. A father who stood like a wall. Together, they had shown everyone watching that courage and dignity would always outshine intimidation and hate. And though the battle wasn't over, Marcus knew now that the bikers' power was broken. They could rev their engines, they could shout their insults, but deep inside they knew the truth. They had been beaten by strength they could never understand. The days following that tense night on Marcus's street carried a new kind of energy through town. The roar of motorcycles, once a sound that made people close their doors and hide behind curtains, now carried a hollow echo. The gang was still there, still trying to ride through town with their leather vests and mocking laughter. But something had shifted. They were no longer feared in the same way. People whispered about what had happened outside Marcus's house. Word spread fast in small towns, and soon even those who hadn't been there repeated the story. The boy in the suit and his father who faced down the gang. For the first time in years, the bikers were not the ones shaping the narrative. Their pride had been cracked, their influence shaken, and they could feel it every time they rolled past. At school, Marcus noticed the change most of all. Students who once avoided eye contact with him now greeted him with quiet respect. Some even stopped him in the hallways just to say, "I saw what you did. That was brave." Teachers, too, seemed to watch him differently, their glances filled not with pity but admiration. He had not set out to be a symbol, but that was what he had become. His father's words echoed inside him. "Every time you refuse to bend, you take their power away." Marcus was beginning to see just how true that was. His silence, his words, his refusal to kneel, those moments had broken something in the bikers that no fist ever could. But deep inside, Marcus knew it wasn't over. Men like the gang's leader didn't just walk away quietly. Pride is a dangerous thing, and when it's wounded, it can drive people to do reckless, desperate things. Marcus felt that truth pressing on him each time he saw the gang riding past the school gates, their eyes burning with resentment. They no longer mocked him out loud, but the weight of their glares told him clearly. They hadn't forgotten. Jordan noticed it too. One afternoon, as they walked home together, Jordan said, "They're quiet now, but I don't trust it. They're planning something. You can feel it." Marcus nodded, though his face remained calm. "I know," he replied softly, "but I'm not afraid of them anymore." Jordan looked at him in awe. "That's what scares them most," he said. "You're not afraid." That night, Marcus sat with his father on the porch again. The sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. They sat in silence for a while until Marcus finally spoke. "Dad, I don't think this is just about me anymore. People are watching. They're learning something from this." His father studied him carefully, then nodded. "You're right. Every stand you take ripples outward. Courage is contagious, son. When one person refuses to bow, it gives others permission to stand up too." Marcus let those words settle, realizing the weight of what he carried now. It wasn't just about surviving the gang. It was about showing others that fear didn't have to win. He thought of the classmates who had whispered encouragement, the neighbors who had stepped outside that night to watch. His actions had spoken louder than he ever imagined. 2 days later, Marcus's understanding of that truth deepened. The gang showed up at the school gates again, but this time something unexpected happened. Instead of shrinking back, a group of students stood at the fence, watching them with steady eyes. When the leader shouted insults at Marcus, one of the students, a boy who had once joined in mocking him, spoke up. "Leave him alone." The words weren't loud, but they carried enough force to make the gang leader snap his head around. Marcus turned in surprise too, his eyes widening. That boy, who had never stood up for anyone before, had found his voice. Another student chimed in, then another. Soon the whispers of defiance grew into a small wave of resistance. The bikers revved their engines angrily, but the shift was undeniable. The balance of fear was changing, not just because of Marcus, but because others were beginning to realize they could stand too. Marcus walked through the gates with his head high, not speaking, not reacting, just carrying himself with the same dignity his father had taught him. The gang leader shouted louder, his pride desperate to claw back control, but it only made him look smaller in comparison. That afternoon, Marcus and Jordan sat under the oak tree, watching the sun filter through the leaves. Jordan grinned and said, "You see what you've done? They used to run the place. Now kids who never said a word before are standing up, all because you showed them it was possible." Marcus shook his head modestly. "It wasn't me. It was what my dad taught me. I just listened." Jordan laughed. "Yeah, well, listening changed everything." At home that evening, Marcus's father could see the change in his son. There was a calmness about him, but also a strength that hadn't been there before. "You're becoming the man I knew you could be," his father said quietly as they washed dishes together. Marcus looked down at his hands, then up at his father. "I was scared at first," he admitted. "I thought standing still made me weak. I thought silence meant losing. But now I understand. It's not about fists. It's about not letting them take your dignity." His father nodded, pride in his eyes. "Exactly. A man who can control himself can control the world around him. You've learned that faster than most." The gang's influence continued to crumble in the days that followed. They still rode, still tried to intimidate, but the fear that once followed them had been broken. Neighbors no longer closed their doors when the engines roared past. Students no longer whispered in fear when they saw them near the school. And though the gang leader tried harder each day to restore his image, he found himself fighting a losing battle. Each glare he gave Marcus only reminded others of the boy who had stood tall, the father who had faced them down. The whispers of admiration for Marcus spread wider, becoming something like legend in the small town. But Marcus never let it go to his head. He remembered his father's warnings about pride, about how dangerous it could be. He kept his head down, his focus on his studies, his eyes steady on the path in front of him. Yet inside he felt a growing fire. He had learned something powerful, something he knew he would carry for the rest of his life. Courage is not the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear win. And with that truth anchored deep inside him, he knew he could face not just the bikers, but any challenge the world threw his way. On the weekend, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Marcus and his father trained together in the backyard. Push-ups, sprints, drills that Marcus had once groaned about but now embraced with determination. His father moved with precision, his scars a silent reminder of battles fought long before Marcus was born. As they rested, Marcus finally asked, "Dad, why did you never tell people you were a Navy SEAL?" His father smiled faintly, his gaze distant. "Because titles don't matter. What matters is the man you are when no one's watching. I didn't want people to respect me because of a name. I wanted them to respect me because of how I carried myself, just like I want for you." Marcus absorbed that truth, realizing more than ever why his father had chosen silence over boasting. It was about dignity, about strength that didn't need to shout. That night, Marcus lay in bed, the sounds of the neighborhood quiet around him. For the first time in weeks, he felt peace. The gang might still be out there, still planning their next move, but they no longer haunted his thoughts. He knew now that no matter what came, he had the strength to endure. He had his father's lessons, his own growing courage, and the support of people who had begun to believe because he had believed first. As he drifted to sleep, he whispered the words to himself again. "You don't scare me." And this time, they weren't just meant for the bikers. They were meant for life itself. The sun rose gently over the small town, painting the sky with streaks of orange and pink. For Marcus, mornings no longer carried the same dread they once did. He no longer felt the weight of eyes that watched him with pity or mockery. Instead, there was a quiet respect, an acknowledgement that he had earned not by fighting with fists but by refusing to bow. Still, he knew in his heart the story wasn't over. The gang lingered, their pride still stung, their anger still burning. The silence from them these last few days felt less like surrender and more like a gathering storm. Marcus was not naive. He knew they would make one final attempt to reclaim what they had lost. That attempt came sooner than expected. On a Friday afternoon, just as the last school bell rang, Marcus stepped out of the building with Jordan by his side. The hum of engines in the distance grew louder and louder until it surrounded the street. This time it wasn't just a few bikers. Nearly the entire gang had gathered, their motorcycles blocking the road like a wall of steel. Students froze on the sidewalk, some gasping, others pulling out their phones to record. The gang leader dismounted slowly, his boots heavy against the pavement, his face twisted with determination. This was not about intimidation anymore, it was about revenge. He was determined to show everyone that Marcus's defiance would not go unanswered. Jordan whispered quickly, "Marcus, we should go the other way." But Marcus shook his head, his jaw set, his heart steady. "If I run now, everything I've stood for means nothing," he replied. He stepped forward, his suit jacket brushing against his sides, his shoes clicking softly against the pavement. Each step carried not only his courage but the lessons his father had drilled into him since childhood. Stand tall. Do not bend. Let your dignity be your shield. He repeated those words silently with every breath. The leader stopped in front of Marcus, towering over him, his eyes burning with fury. "You think you made a fool out of me?" he growled, his voice echoing across the hushed crowd. "You think one little boy in a suit can make me look weak?" Marcus said nothing, only looking at him with the same calm eyes that had unnerved him before. The leader shoved him hard in the chest, sending him stumbling back a few steps. The students gasped, some shouting for him to stop, others frozen in fear. But Marcus regained his balance, straightened his jacket, and lifted his chin once again. His silence, as always, was louder than any insult. It was the kind of silence that could not be broken, the kind of silence that turned humiliation back onto the one who tried to deliver it. The leader snarled, frustrated, his pride unraveling in front of everyone. "Say something," he barked. "Fight me. Show them you're not weak." For a moment, Marcus considered speaking. He thought of the words he had used before, the strength they carried. But then, before he could open his mouth, another voice rose behind him, deep, steady, commanding. "He doesn't have to fight you. Because I'm here." The crowd turned in unison as Marcus's father walked forward, his presence once again silencing the chaos. Dressed simply in jeans and a dark shirt, he carried himself with the same unshakable calm he always did. The gang leader's bravado faltered for the briefest moment, his eyes flickering with recognition. He remembered the last time he had faced this man. He remembered the quiet authority that had cut deeper than any blow. The father stopped beside Marcus, placing a firm hand on his son's shoulder. "You've already lost, and you know it," he said to the leader, his voice steady, each word deliberate. "You've thrown insults, you've tried intimidation, and you've brought your whole gang to make yourself feel strong. But every time you stand in front of my son, you walk away smaller. That's because strength doesn't come from fear. It comes from standing for something bigger than yourself." The leader's face darkened, but he said nothing. The other bikers shifted nervously, their earlier confidence slipping away again. Marcus, standing tall beside his father, felt a surge of pride. He had always known his father was strong, but this was different. This was not just physical strength. This was strength of spirit, of conviction, of discipline, and it was the same strength he had been trying to teach Marcus all along. The leader tried one last time to rally himself. You think words mean anything? You think you can just talk and win? Out here only fists matter. Only power matters? Marcus's father stepped closer, his eyes locked on him. You're wrong. Power without control is weakness. Fists without honor are empty. And fear without dignity is nothing. You've been hiding behind your gang, behind your noise, because deep down you know the truth. You're already defeated. His voice grew firmer, louder. You lost the moment a boy in a suit refused to kneel. The silence that followed was heavy. The students stared in awe, the bikers exchanged uneasy glances. The leader's face burned red, his fists clenched, but he could not deny the truth. Every attempt to break Marcus had failed. Every effort to restore his image had only made him look smaller. And now in front of everyone he had been stripped bare, not by punches but by the quiet strength of a father and son who refused to bend. Finally, with a growl of frustration, he turned sharply, storming back to his motorcycle. This isn't over, he muttered, though the words carried no weight anymore. His gang followed, their engines roaring as they sped away, but the sound was no longer fearsome. It was the noise of retreat, of defeat, of power lost. The crowd erupted, not in fear, not in laughter, but in applause. Students clapped, some even cheered. Neighbors who had stepped outside nodded with respect. Marcus felt a wave of emotion wash over him, not pride in himself, but gratitude. Gratitude for his father's lessons, for the strength he had found inside himself, for the courage that had carried him through. Jordan ran up to him, grinning wide. Marcus, do you see what just happened? They're done. They can't touch you anymore. You and your dad, you changed everything. Marcus smiled faintly, his voice calm. We didn't change everything. We just reminded people that fear doesn't have to win. That evening, father and son sat on the porch together, the quiet of the neighborhood returning like a long-lost friend. The sun dipped low, the cicadas sang, and for the first time in weeks there was peace. Marcus turned to his father. I understand now, he said softly. It wasn't about fighting them. It was about not letting them take my dignity. His father nodded, pride in his eyes. That's the lesson, son. In life, people will try to strip you of who you are. They'll insult, intimidate, and push. But if you stand tall, if you refuse to kneel, you win every time. And when others see you stand, they'll find the courage to stand too. Marcus felt those words settle deep inside him. He knew they were not just about the gang. They were about life, about the battles yet to come, the challenges waiting on the horizon, and he knew now that he was ready. As the stars began to appear, Marcus whispered to himself, the words that had carried him through every moment of fear. You don't scare me. Only this time he wasn't speaking to the bikers. He was speaking to life itself, to every obstacle that might come his way. And with his father beside him, with his own courage burning brighter than ever, he knew the truth. Nothing could ever break him again.